Hello everyone. So we're going to just wait for 1 minute and then start up with the webinar. Yeah, I think we can start for now. So good morning and afternoon everyone. I am Akanksha Shukla from Kyanza Solutions, your host for today's webinar. A warm welcome to all of you and I hope I'm audible to everyone. I sincerely want to thank each one of you for joining us today at this webinar organized by Kyanza Solutions. The topic for today's virtual live session is going to be taking a second look at the supply chain planning rules. And now, before I introduce our speaker, Erika, to you, I would really like to share some insights about our organization. So, Kyanza is an IT consulting firm focused on delivering enterprise performance management solutions. We use market-leading integrated planning platforms. Kyanza was founded in 2015 to assist organizations to successfully chart their EPM journeys using new age technology platforms. We have our offices in Singapore, India, Netherlands, and Canada. We are a global partner of Jedox, which is one of the leading EPM technology providers, and a global partner of Blackline, a leading brand in automation and control of the entire financial close process. Our core experiences lies in creating and delivering EPM solutions in sales and operations planning, supply chain planning, financial planning and analysis. We have architectured solutions for various complex business cases in food and beverage, healthcare, cosmetics, insurance, consumer electronics, manufacturing, mining and logistics, and shipping industries. So now with that, let me introduce you to our speaker for today, Erika Barber. So Erika is Director of Business Development and Operations for Kyanza Solutions, and she has been a supply chain consultant for over 30 years of experience working with many global organizations, most recently with Ajinomoto Philippines Corporation, Peloton, Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits, Monsanto, Symmetricom, Emerson, and Dana Corporation. She has a BSc in Computer Science and an MBA, both from McMaster University, Hamilton, Canada. And she is certified in Production and Inventory Management by the Association of Supply Chain Management. Her areas of expertise include managing ERP solutions, implementations, and large-scale technical conversations, and supply chain consulting advocating ASCM principles applied to S&OP, inventory accuracy, supply and demand planning, process redesign, re-engineering, logistics, and chain management. Much of the content that she'll be sharing today with us would be the result of those fruitful interactions. So now, just a few key pointers before starting the webinar I'd like to put that to make this webinar more engaging, we are keeping it in listen-only mode, which means all the audios will be muted. Please write all your questions in the question sections. The handout is available in the section for you to download, and after the session, the recordings will be sent to you within a day or two. So that's all from my side. Now I request Erika to please take us through the session. And now over to you, Erika.
Hello, thanks very much, Akanksha. I appreciate the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Akanksha, I just want to make sure my audio is okay.
Yes, we can hear you fine. Yep.
All right, great. Then I'll start. So I'd like to take you on a little journey here to look at your supply chain planning rules. And I'm hoping that through this webinar, I'm going to convince you that you need to take a second look at some of the rules that you've been using for the last possibly decades. I am wondering how we even got here. Why have we got to the point where we need to take a second look? Well, it's the supply chain turmoil that we've had in the last few years. We've got geopolitical influence. We've got global warming threat. It's forcing manufacturing and transportation changes globally. We've got the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's hope that's in our rearview mirror, but it certainly has opened our eyes to a lot of the things that we need to review in our systems. It was a severe impact on supply. So the supply side, first of all, was greatly impacted with lockdowns, quarantine. People were getting sick, people were away, factories shut down, and we also had failed businesses, unfortunately. So that was the demand side. Sorry, the supply side. The demand side, it also took a hit. So we had, in some cases, an extremely large increase in the demand for example, PPE and disinfectants. And on the other side of the coin, restaurants, entertainment business, travel, it went severely down in demand. And that, of course, caused a ripple effect for a lot of other businesses that were impacted or that were connected to those industries. Political conflict. Unfortunately, we've got this Ukraine-Russia war that is turning into a global impact on all of us. We've got the threat of China invading Taiwan. War, of course, is a worst-case scenario, but from that, we're also seeing weaponization of food supplies and natural resources. So again, we've got additional turmoil still continuing even after the pandemic with now these political conflicts. We've still got an unstable environment. We've now got different natural resources being held back. So we still are experiencing some sort of turmoil within our supply chain. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss a few of the old rules, what I call old rules, things that we have been using for the last few years, last few decades. I'm just going to pick a few of them today and talk about how we need to just kind of review those from a different angle to see if we can minimize future impact of these disruptions. First thing I'm going to look at is just-in-time manufacturing. So it's certainly under threat from supply chain disruptions. And the question is it doomed or is it merely morphing? Next thing I'm going to look at is global source of both material and services. The reduced material and labor costs that caused us to go to global sourcing and outsourcing, are they now justified with all the shipment delays and misses and the costs incurred in making sure that we get the expediting done in different modes of shipment? We just need to review that at this point. So I'll talk about a couple of the issues that we should be looking at there. And then finally, I question how we measure our suppliers. Usually we measure them on price, quality, quantity, and delivery. And the biggest piece that has gone up, the one factor that has been raised, I believe it was below the 5th ranking, is now 2nd in ranking, is the risk factor. So let's take just-in-time manufacturing for starters. What are the traditional rules of just-in-time? Components and spares are only ordered when needed. You only order what is absolutely necessary. Inventory is kept in low numbers within the factories. Efficiency savings, both in inventory and warehouse space. So if you've got some warehouse space savings, you can use that for production purposes. And you want to keep your upstream suppliers on short notice so that the inventory is produced as you need it. Now, the critical point in just-in-time manufacturing is not necessarily zero inventory, it's inventory only when you need it. That's the point of just-in-time. So what are the risks that we have imposed by putting in just-in-time? Suppliers have to be as defect-free as you are. So you're the jet production facility, you demand defect-free material, you have quality control put in place. The, the material that comes in, you want to make sure it's as defect-free as what your rules are in your plant. Otherwise, you're going to have rejects, you're going to stop the line, you're going to have problems, you're going to have quality issues. So that's one of the criteria for your, that's one of the risks when you're selecting your suppliers. Inventory has to be provided on time and every time. So now we're expecting in a JIT environment that we've got our inventory when we need it, and we've got the inventory that we need. That's another risk now with the situation that we have now with the turmoil. Plants and warehouses in a just-in-time environment, they carry only days or sometimes even hours of inventory, not months. I did a lot of work in the automotive environment. I did some implementations in many tier 2 suppliers. And a lot of times they had multiple deliveries a day because the deliveries would happen right onto the line, right onto the production line of the automobile provider. If anything goes wrong in one little piece of the process, the entire process is threatened. So your continuity of your line now gets broken and the entire process is threatened. When key suppliers come under strain, it's difficult to pivot. That's because you've got an understanding with them that they deliver at a certain point, they deliver at a certain quantity, certain quality. If all of a sudden they're under strain and they have some issues with their production, it's very difficult for you to quickly pivot to another supplier that can work based on those same rules that you've agreed upon with this key supplier. So just-in-time delivery, it works great, but only if you can deliver. The impact of recent supply chain disruptions. JIT inventory policies are based on optimistic levels of demand and supply variations. I don't think we've seen a whole lot of optimistic levels in the past few years. And based on the current events, it's probably not going to be optimistic for a while. The steady stream of just-in-time supply and production has pretty well ceased to exist, and it ceased to be reliable, at least. We really can't expect things to come exactly as we had planned in our system, so it's not a steady stream anymore. The standard risk management methods are not enough to prepare for the extreme volatility that we've experienced in the last few years. The lack of supply of even one component can shut down our production. So imagine you're making your product, you've got it all ready, you've got all you've gone through all the quality control issues. Now you've got you're shipping it over to you're sending it over to your shipping department. They've put it in boxes, and you've run out of tape. A simple component, the last thing that you'd think of that would stop a production shipping issue, and here it is, you've got tape that has stopped you from actually shipping your product. So the smallest thing, even if it's a C type of item, can actually stop or shut down your production or your shipping. So you've got to be, that's one of the risks in just-in-time. This is a quote from Eric Caldwell. He's an XBO logistics person. Companies traditionally focused on optimizing inventory, on leveraging offshore sourcing, and on just-in-time processes to reduce costs, but not anymore. COVID-19 disruptions made it difficult for them to manage their supply chains. Now, is there anybody in the audience that is not impacted in some way, negatively or positively, by these disruptions? Is there, maybe we can have a show of hands of anybody that has just wonderful last couple of years. I'm willing to bet there's no hands up. So the question is, can we now afford to be too lean? Is that really going to, in the long run, be cost effective? Let's think about some possible solutions. We can use third-party logistics. They can hold our inventory. That will free up our space, and we have some inventory that's kind of treated like a safety stock. We can invest in e-commerce and multiple fulfillment models. So I know a lady that owned a gym, and through the pandemic, they had to close down the gym. But all of a sudden, she came up with the online classes. So she scheduled online classes. She had people register. She very quickly morphed into an online offering. She rented out her equipment. As a matter of fact, she loaned it out so that people would be able to do the exercises at home. She prepared schedules for her clientele. So she was able to very quickly change her model so that she had different fulfillment methods of getting her end result delivered. Increase in supply chain transparency scenario planning. Again, I'd like a show of hands, and Akansha, if you can help me here with the count. How many people in the audience currently employ some kind of scenario planning? I'm just going to give that a few seconds. If you could just raise your hand if
We
you
see some
currently
raised
use
hands.
scenario planning.
Yes, we have about 3-4 raised hands in the section, Erika, for us.
Excellent. Maybe you can send me a note on how you use your scenario planning and how that is working for you. I'm glad to hear that some people are using that already. Very powerful technique, because especially right now, there's a lot of people that have been hit by the COVID nightmare. The question is, now that things are starting to settle, things are starting to clear up again, I'm hoping it's behind us. Is our demand for our product going to bounce back up to what it was pre-COVID? Is it going to raise gradually, or going to stay the way it is now because people have found alternative products? And this is where the scenario planning would really help. Is my sales going to go up by 5%, by 10%? What happens if this happens? It's a very good way to just plan for different scenarios. Whichever one happens, you're going to be ready for it by doing scenario planning. You want to try to diversify your sources and logistics routes wherever possible. So we have to do a little bit more homework in developing the source of our products, the source of our components, and the logistics routes that we're using. And we have to stock up on key material. If you've got a particular component that's critical to your organization, to your manufacturing process, for example, stock up on some of that, a little bit more than what you have in the past. And then build redundancy in your supply chain. I always, when I was ever doing a project, I always questioned why I had to always do, risk analysis and then do redundancy. And every time we did it, we ended up benefiting from it. So it's a lot of work. It's extra work. Sometimes it's throwaway work, but it definitely helps you if you do run into a problem, because now you've got a second option to go to. Digital transformation is another way that you can mitigate risk with your just-in-time manufacturing. really important to have a lot of information in your system. It balances service cost trade-offs. You've got inventory optimization tools, and an example of that would be automatic calculation of your safety stock. So if you've got your system that is collecting all this data, it's collecting all the history on your variances, on things that have gone off track, um, you can use calculations within the system to recalculate your safety stock. It has all the information in there if you are keeping track of actuals, shipments, vendor receipts, those kind of things, and the timing and the quality, and then that would impact your safety stock value. And then advanced analytics, so that you've got your control boards, for example, and you can see exactly what's happening in one big picture, and that'll help you to zero in on exactly what it is that's causing the big problem. And improved visibility beyond immediate suppliers. It's really important to get to know your supplier's supplier. So what's happened in a few cases is you've got a very reliable supplier, everything is going well, but all of a sudden one of their suppliers is now in trouble, and therefore your supplier that has been very diligent up to this point is now in trouble because they're now missing one of their key components. So one of the things that some of the larger companies do is they really engage in the whole entire supply chain below their suppliers, and get to know exactly what's happening all the way down to the bottom of the chain. So in our system at Kiansa, we do have advanced analytics opportunity. So what you would do is you would see your, excuse me, you would see your main screen here, go into whichever one you're interested in, whether it's distribution, manufacturing, supply management. You would go into the S&OP command center, and this is where you would see some of the flags. So I've got issues in certain areas. I've got everything in the system, so I can see right here where my problems are. So in this last, the second row here is the one I'm interested in right now, is my last 3 months statistics. So I've got my last 3 months of customer satisfaction, shipments. I've got production variance from plan. I've got exceptions in production, exceptions in procurement. What this shows me is I have some problems coming up either in production or procurement. And if that number is higher than my threshold, I now have a flag that says, I need to look into this. Now, because I've digitized all of my procurement information, for example, I can now go down into a deeper screen and see exactly what that entailed. What supplier was it that caused the problem or had the problem, or is there a supplier that's now out of business that has caused me to have a production problem? So this is where scenario analysis comes in too. So we've got the options here to do scenarios. Again, you would have a situation where I'm expecting my demand to pop right back up to what it was before, or pop back down if in the case of PPE or disinfectants. Um, is it going to stay stable? Is it going to go up by 5%, 10%? You would do your scenario planning here, and that way you can tell, like month by month, you would be monitoring this to see which scenario is taking hold. And having these scenarios, you can be prepared to use whichever one is active, whichever one you find is the one that's that your process is following. So, so just-in-time manufacturing, is it going away? Probably not. Cost is such a powerful driver that just-in-time inventory is not going to go away. The challenge is, who is going to be responsible for filling in the gap between just-in-time and just-in-case? So that's just-in-time and just-in-case. This is from Abe Ashkenazi from the ASCM, the Association of Supply Chain Management. Let's move now to global sourcing of material and services. So our traditional sourcing practices, we're very much into offshoring. It's been practiced for over 20 years. What is offshoring? It's a relocation of a business process from one country to another. So usually this would happen in operational processes, such as manufacturing or supporting processes like accounting. We moved a lot of people, a lot of companies from the U.S. down to Mexico, for example. So we did a lot of, I did a lot of projects down in the States. And that's a lot of the things that we were doing is offshoring. We were setting up plants down in Mexico for various reasons that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Supplier selection is another thing you need to look at, and I'll be talking about sole source suppliers and single source suppliers, and then followed by supplier segmentation and how that will help you. So, offshoring practices, why did we go there? Well, it was definitely for lower labor costs. We did establish new markets in different countries. We were able to gain knowledge of overseas markets and therefore expand our offering, and definitely took advantage of alternate tax and regulatory benefits. So we moved away from things like unions. We avoided a lot of the labor laws that are more prevalent in our own country. Um, that led us there to the offshoring, and it really made it much more cost effective to do the offshoring, even with the extra the logistics costs. But how did that impact? How was that impacted by the recent disruptions? An example is the current pipeline of material from Asia to the US. It's totally clogged, and no one knows how to unclog it. Rising logistics costs. Here's a statistic. The median shipping cost for a container from China to the West recently quadrupled. And there's also a negative impact on supply chain speed and timeliness. So there's a number of reasons for this. We've got essential freight handling equipment is often not where it's supposed to be. It's not where it's needed. If it is there when it's needed, there aren't enough truckers or there aren't enough warehouse operators. This leads to longer lead times and increased risk of delays. So is offshoring becoming outdated? Depends. It mostly affects the long supply chains. This is where the nodes are very far apart from the relocating companies. And in contrast, the short supply chains are being strengthened. So what's happening is there's something called reshoring or backshoring, which is really the opposite of offshoring. So it's bringing the industry back into within your national borders. Nearshoring, companies that are moving to neighboring countries. So there would be, for example, in our continent over here, the U.S. could possibly get material from Canada. And then there's a concept that is starting to become prevalent is friendshoring, and this is a result of all the discontent that is happening globally, politically. So this is moving businesses from hostile countries to countries that you can call friends. So countries that have your own, that work the same as you. They have the same moral standards. They have the same labor laws. So you'd be moving your businesses to those kind of friendly countries. So do we need to limit offshoring? Not necessarily. Some industries are not even impacted, at least not negatively impacted. For example, information technology and streaming services, they're expected to rise. It doesn't matter where you are located if you're providing IT services. You've got more people working from home. The demand for online technology has absolutely skyrocketed. Shares in Zoom video up by 50% since February of 2020. Companies need the advanced technology. I keep emphasizing the digitization that we're really promoting. And the automation is important to cope with these uncertainties that are always hitting us. So digitalization is your key to flexibility and agility. To be flexible, you need to have that information at your fingertips. It needs to be readily available and viewable by everybody. So the IT service industry does not depend on physical movement of product. It depends on movement of information through online services. But let's look at the big picture. What really is the impact of what's happening with nearshoring and offshoring and backshoring and friendshoring? All of those policies are really sending us back to the Cold War type of thinking. It's an us and them attitude. So friendshoring is totally counterproductive to the essence of globalization. Think about what that's doing. Friendshoring is really decoupling into Western and Eastern blocks, and that invariably will impact the world order. Poor countries will suffer if they're forced to pick sides, and not all of them will want to pick sides, but they might be forced to. Now, there was a talk yesterday. President Biden did a presentation to the United Nations yesterday. He assured everyone that countries will not be forced to pick sides. I would love to believe him, but based on political history, I don't think that's going to be a realistic expectation, because there are countries that are going to want to deal with both the Western and Eastern blocs, but they will invariably be politically pressured not to do both. So free and fair global trade will be threatened, and prices will go up because we're going to lose all the advantages of what we had with offshoring in the first place. The McKinsey research team, they use a term called great rebalancing. They estimate that in the next few years, 25% of world exports will be affected by this phenomenon, and the value would be about $4.5 billion. So there is going to be a change with this movement from offshore to one of the other policies. Let's look now at supplier selection. How do we minimize our risk with suppliers? Let's talk about sole source suppliers first. Sole source supplier is getting material services from only source available. So I don't have any other options. There's one source available and I have to get it from that particular supplier. So there's no immediate opportunity to go to another vendor. A single source supplier, on the other hand, is a dedicated vendor. So you've built a good relationship with that particular supplier, and that relationship has caused you to be dedicated to that vendor. Other sources are available for the product that you're looking for, but you have singled out this particular supplier. So a buyer has a choice of where to buy, but the relationship has dictated that you go to the single source. To minimize the risk, you should digitalize your supplier master list. Again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. Get to know your supplier's suppliers. Ensure that you have accurate and complete database of suppliers. This is probably one of the most difficult things that we experience when we're starting projects, is making sure that we're getting accurate and complete data from our customers. It's critical. If you're not getting the right data and it's not complete, then it doesn't matter what system you put in, it's not going to help you. Identify your sole source suppliers. Make sure that they are sole source and not single source, because the difference being that there are other options with the single source. Identify those who supply material and services on your critical path. So your critical path is where you don't have any leeway of missing your timelines. So you've got to make sure that your critical path is your top priority in making sure that the material and services are available. Consider a cross-functional team to assess this risk factor. And that's critical because a lot of times you would have different eyes looking at the same information, seeing it differently. And if you've got a cross-functional team and they all are aware of the situation, they're all aware of what they're seeing in the data, then that will provide for a better solution for you minimizing your risk. Continuously grow that database. Make sure you're always putting in alternative suppliers, new suppliers, ones that have come on board that are starting up. It will always, you could end up getting, from a sole source to a single source just by coming up with alternative new suppliers. Then what you want to do is categorize your suppliers in terms of risk. So you've got your low risk suppliers. Those are not sole or single source, or they could be sole source, but they don't have any supply risk at the present time. You've got medium risk. A medium risk supplier would be somebody like that you would have a single source, but there are other sources available, and it would have a low impact on your existing operations. So it's not on your critical path, for example. And then some suppliers would be classified as high risk. So you've got immediate and high level risk of disruption. So they could be in trouble. They could be a vendor that is really struggling. A sole supplier is a high risk because you don't have other options. And then suppliers of critical components or services within your product process, that is also considered a high risk supplier. If possible, consider a no sole source policy. That's, and I know that's very difficult to do. You could have proprietary products or proprietary services, so that's very difficult. However, if you can think about designing products without sole source components, do that wherever possible. So here's our procurement and one of our procurement dashboards. In this case, we're looking at a weekly graph here of what's going on weekly with my demand and supply of available supply. So if you see the first 5 weeks, we've got consistently lower available supply, which is the light blue line, than we have total demand. So we're not meeting our demand. We're always short. What I'm going to do here is now I'm going to look at these exceptions. So we've got all these exceptions. This is my red flag to say, hey, we've got a problem here because we were short supply shortages here in week 35. 36 was even worse, but let's look at 35 for now. So drilling down to week 35, what we see is in plant A, we had, and I'll just take an example, A732. This we kept missing our demand numbers from that line. Now, if you look at this chart, you see that line 5 and line 3 also can make A732, and they have leftover capacity. So by having all this information here, I can see that it's line 9 that is the problem. So what's the problem with line 9? Is that being serviced by a different supplier? Is that, if I got a JIT process there that's broken, what's going on with my line 9? So now I would go in and I would check the bill of material for the product that I'm making on line 9, and I find that this product is being used, and I would dig in to see, okay, why is that product short, and what is causing the problem there, the delays on line 9. But I've got all this information in the system that I can look at, and I can readily see the entire picture of what's going on. Now I've got several suppliers in this case. I've got several suppliers that I can go to. This is what I have been spending. I've got them segmented here. I've got some of them set up as important or transactional. If you look up here, the different segmentation analysis that we do in this particular case is strategic, important, or transactional. So strategic would be somebody that I build a business with. I want to build that partnership and strengthen it. An important one, I've done a lot of business with that vendor, so that I consider that an important vendor. They're a big part of my delivery. And then transactional, which is something that, you know, I just repeatedly buy stuff from these vendors, and it's just a rolling purchase order that I've got with them. But I can tell readily when I've got all of this stuff in the system, I can tell readily that I've got a problem with one supplier. I can go to another supplier because there's another supplier that provides that product. Without this information, I'm doing a lot of digging, a lot of emails, a lot of spreadsheets that I'm keeping on my own that I have to now dig through. Or maybe I have to look for a new supplier and start a relationship. Whereas here, I've already got some history here. I've got this all in the system. I can talk to those suppliers and say, hey, I've already done this much business with you. Can you give me some more product because I'm a bit short? Or on the other hand, you know, I've done a lot of business with you. Can you give me a better price? All this stuff is now in your system, and you can definitely negotiate better and reduce your risk. And then finally, we've got, when we go right down to the supplier allocations, once I've decided which supplier I want to go to, we allow we allow user entry. So we've got a user entry line here. The blue lines across the template here are ones that you can override. You can enter values in. So I might allocate a certain demand. I might change my allocation percent. So I'm going to buy 40% of my material from supplier one, and another percentage from I think what this is here is we've got the allocation percent set up already, but you can change that to whatever you need it to be. So maybe this one here was set up initially as 20% allocation. I'm going to move that down to 0 because I know that that particular supplier is in trouble. So it really allows me to go deep down into what I want to do, how I want to reallocate to each supplier. And by having all these suppliers in the system, I can see that. I can see the history of what they have done, how they have performed, and I can make those decisions very quickly. So supplier, that leads us to supplier performance measurements. Again, the traditional rules, cost is such a big component when we're measuring our suppliers. It's usually given top priority for vendor selection. The automotive industry, their key objective was to reduce cost of everything. And it got to the point where the top 3 had to help out some of their suppliers because they kept asking for a 3% reduction every year, and it got to the point where the suppliers were not making any money and they were all starting to close down. So the big 3 had to help them out. But today, the supply chain disruptions pretty well negate these cost savings because the amount of money that you spend on expediting or getting different shipment methods have really eaten in on a lot of those cost savings. The perfect order has always been a prominent way to measure suppliers. So the right price, the right material, the right quality, the right quantity, and at the right time. So sometimes when you need to minimize the risk of a sole supplier or a single supplier, you may need to ease up on this requirement. The other thing is you need to elevate risk in your selection criteria. So for example, you might want to select a local provider or one that can get you the material with the least risk available. The risk wasn't one of the top 5 criteria for traditionally, was not one of the top 5 in the selection of suppliers. And now one of the articles I read from one of the statistics gatherers, it looks like it's moved up to number 2 in the selection criteria. So the conclusion, globally, our global supply chains really should be revisited. We should look at our supply chain practices, see where we can improve it, and make sure that we've got good visibility and the ability to even see the flags of problems coming up. We need to rethink our just-in-time philosophy. Consider adding a just-in-case component. Maybe the focus has been on zero inventory. It should be on the right inventory more so. Consider restructuring the overall supply base. So look at your vendors, look at who's your sole supplier, your single supplier, who's the high risk, who's the low risk. Reevaluate how you measure your suppliers. So make sure that you're looking at the right measures for each of your suppliers and make sure that risk is one of the components. Digital transformation, I can't stress enough that will mitigate disruption impact because everybody sees the same information, everybody sees the information in your system. You can see flags early and react to them earlier. You can mitigate the disruption by seeing ahead of time that you've got a little bit of a trend problem. And then finally, including risk as one of your supply chain decision factors, and not just in the measurement of your suppliers, but in your entire supply chain setup. So when you're looking at this, when you're looking at your entire supply chain, go right from the bottom up and make sure you've got that risk component in every single node of your supply chain. So all in all, the biggest source of your defense at this point is making sure that your supply chain is resilient and it's flexible. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to handle the next disruption, because there will be disruptions in your future. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being with me on this call. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this point.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you for the session today. And I'm sure there was a lot of information that the audience would really find useful. So I can see there are a few questions for you from the audience. So let me just read them out to you and you can answer them.
Sure.
So the first one is just in time. Are these sustainable solutions or passing the risk 1 and 2?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question. So just in time, can you repeat that question, please, Akanksha?
It's more like, are these sustainable solutions or passing the risk 1 and 2? If I think of
The risk 1 and 2, which were risks 1 and 2? Do you mind, whoever asked that question, can you please elaborate a little bit?
uh, raised
Manohara?
hand. Yeah, it's from Manoj Manoharan, I think. He raised a hand, he might be just getting back to it. Just
Sure.
3PLs.
So the 3PL would help you there for just in time, because now you've got a third-party logistics provider that can hold some of your inventory. So that would allow you to, almost like a safety stock situation, but they would hold the inventory for you, for some cost, but they would be able to hold the inventory and get it to you when you need it. So that would be one mitigating risk factor for JIT. Does that answer your question?
I think we can get back to him. If he has anything else, he can really write to us.
Sure.
And then we
Please
can have the
send me a note, please, and I'll be happy to elaborate.
And the second one, we have one more
Thanks,
question.
Manoj.
How do we prepare best of peak season in terms of inventory and customer service?
How to prepare a peak?
How to prepare best for the peak season in terms of inventory and customer service?
Okay, there's a couple of things you can do there. One is the best thing there would be to build up your inventory. So you want to build up inventory ahead of time. Again, if you've got a digitized system, you can see ahead of time where your peaks and valleys are. And hopefully it sounds like it's a seasonal product that you're talking about. For the seasonal product, you would see your forecast ahead of time, and you would know that let's say month 6 and month 12, I have peaks in my seasonal product. What I would want to do to keep my production plan stable and to make sure it's a level load is I would want to build up my inventory in the first 6 months up to the level that I need it. So I would have more inventory than what I need, or I mean, what I need in the first few months, but I would be building up to the inventory I need in my peak periods without incurring a lot of extra costs by putting in overtime in the last minute because I'm now short inventory. So that would be one way. The other way would be to produce different products at different times of the year, depending on what your other products are and whether they have a different seasonality pattern than your first one. So I've seen that happen where you've got a customer that has different seasonality. They've got offsetting seasonal products, and they would be putting in all the labor into the one product and then putting in the labor into the next product for the peak season, the appropriate peak seasons. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure who that came from.
It was from Kaustubh Marathi. So there's one more question, like why we have some companies like Toyota that have decided to stick with just in time.
So like I said, just in time will not go away. How did Toyota do it? After the financial crisis that happened many years ago, they really took a good look at the system and how they've got it set up. And they are an absolute perfect example of what I was talking about with getting to know your suppliers. So what they did was they did thousands of and they have information on thousands of vendors, and not just the vendors but the actual supply chain of that vendor. They put in a lot of time into really analyzing their whole supply chain right down to the bottom vendor that supplied something that was eventually going to come to them as maybe a different product. So they put in a lot of effort in making sure that they had a good a good solid database of all their vendors, and therefore they were able to pivot very quickly. The other thing they did was they actually kept a lot of inventory of some of their critical items, so 4 to 6 months worth of inventory of some of their most critical items, and that allowed them to get through the problem with semiconductors, for example. And they saw that coming from, based on what was happening, based on all the information that they had in their system. They knew which items that they had to keep extra stock of because there was a tendency or a trend in reducing inventory or having problems with inventory supply. So they did very well. I mean, they're an epitome of good practices in EPM and actual production systems. They do put in a lot of work. They invest a lot of resources into their database, and they keep it up to date. And according to the CEO, they do calls daily, monthly, weekly to all of their vendors and make sure that the information is up to date, make sure that the product is coming in. So they keep a real tight control of their suppliers.
Thanks, Erika. Just one more question. Do you recommend safety stocks to be fluid?
Fluid? No, not really. I like the concept of the system recalculating the safety stock for you, because the system will have all the information and history of all the different trends, the different variances. So it will give you a better safety stock number. But to recalculate it too often is not good either, because it really will, it'll impact your production planning and your production plan. It'll make it very nervous if if you're constantly changing your safety stock. I don't really like to see it more than maybe every 3 months, recalculated every 3 months, 6 months. I've seen some companies have the same safety stock for years, and that would be obviously a very stable product that they've got. But to have it fluid, no, I would not recommend that, because that will cause nervousness uh, in your production process.
Thanks, Erika. There is two more questions. Just one more we can take as the time allows. And so, how can you access risk of a supplier?
How can you assess it? There's all
Okay.
sorts of yeah. Digitization is the one thing. Digitization will allow you to see how often were they late, how often were they early. Because early is a problem too, because now you've got excess inventory in your plant that you don't want. How was the quality of their delivery? How many times did they change their delivery? How many delays did you have, or changes? That's one of the things that you'd look at, is the history in your system of exactly what has transpired. The other thing you would look at is market information on them, market information on their suppliers, their financial status, which ones are in trouble. That would also allow you to put a risk factor on the particular supplier. Sometimes you can call other companies that use that product, the other companies that use that same supplier for their product, and get information from them. But basically, a lot of just market analysis and historical analysis of the information that you have in your system.
Thanks, Erika. I think we'll have to wrap up, but we have few more questions. So to all the people who we are not able to answer, we'll definitely provide you with the answers through the mail.
That'd be
So
great.
yeah, so you
Yep.
can write to them. And this was a very
Oh,
interactive session. Erika, any last words you want to say? Then we can just.
no, I got some people thinking about changing. I know change is not an easy thing, but just give it a little bit of thought as to what you've been doing, what you've been used to doing for the last little while, and just give it a second look. I hope I've got to that point anyways. Thanks very much, everybody, for attending.
With this, we'll really come to the end of the session. We'll get back to everyone who has not been able to, we are not able to answer. We'll get you through the mails.
Thanks.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. And this was an enriching session for all of us. So anything else you want to keep us, like you want to ask us, you can always visit us on our website. That's kyansa.com and kyansa.sg. And we'll be really happy to answer your questions and queries. And thank you, Erika, once again for
Thank you.
the
Thank you for
session.
your help, Akansha. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Thank you, everyone.